Okay, welcome everyone to the Tuesday, December 10th, Working Group Component Standard office hours. This is our hour for folks to ask questions, hopefully get answers, and whatever people need. So let's get started. I think Alex, you had some stuff from this morning you wanted to discuss.
Yes. All right. Yeah. Regarding
Very
the
nice little display in your background, by the way.
yeah, it's like traditional Eastern German like woodwork kind of stuff. It's like they do it like in the Iron Mountains.
Very cool.
So when you go to Germany, or if you're looking for like a souvenir, like this is some really craftsmanship.
Right on. Yeah, we're gonna try and make it out for KubeCon EU to do a maintainer track talk for that. So
Nice.
maybe I'll be able to pick something up.
That would be cool. Yeah. It's in Amsterdam, right? The KubeCon EU.
It's in Amsterdam, yeah.
Nice.
So,
All right. Yeah, regarding the controller manager, first have some newbie questions. So you mentioned that you say like we should look at all these steps necessary to get to beta. Is that right?
yes.
So do you mean like move the external types to V1 beta 1?
Yes. I want to figure out what that's like the most direct signal that we've actually been able to move things forward. And I want to figure out what the actual blockers are for that. And I think it's basically the subset of config in the type matches like what we're comfortable with. And it works to load from a file. I think that there are some questions around like whether we want to try and get to beta the same way we did the kubelet. So what we did in the kubelet, right, was we implemented all this like complicated backwards compatibility logic so that we could incrementally migrate flags into the config. And it might be better to try and just do it as like a one-off. Here you can either use either or, but not both kind of migration, because then we won't need that layer. And legacy flag was the idea around like, oh, well, maybe we could do flag registrations a little different and it would make it easier to implement this, but that hasn't really moved forward. So I think the one thing that blocked kubeproxy, for example, from moving forward with the either or thing was that we hadn't come up with like any real solution to the instance specific config. And we thought there might be a few different ways to do it. And so we didn't necessarily have a way to do all the flags at once.
What do you mean with instance specific config?
Oh, that was just like stuff like hostname override, node IP, are fields that are set differently on every instance of a like process. So for example, if you're deploying something like kubeproxy as a daemon set, and in that spec that you've deployed, you're pointing at one config map for the whole thing. That doesn't necessarily work because you might need to set that differently for each one. So having some sort of solution to that is kind of a blocker to being able to do the like all at once flag to config migration. And that's kind of what pushed us on the kubelet side into doing the incremental stuff. That and the kubelet had a bunch of other options that like people weren't sure if they wanted moved or not. The kubelet was a lot more complicated of a case. So those are the kinds of problems that need to get solved.
Okay, so I mean, like from when the kubelet config was alpha, and so at that point we couldn't use it like we couldn't generate it from a config file. Is that correct when it was an alpha?
Right. I mean, you could test it, but nobody would use it because it wasn't a stable API.
Hmm.
We used it
Okay.
in some tests, like in some of the Node-RED tests, because it was convenient for some of those things. But
Hmm. And so then like during the migration to beta, you introduced all the stuff which was necessary to actually make it work.
right, right. So
Okay.
it was stuff that was necessary to make it work. It was a lot of flags embed custom structures in the command line. So you'll like have a flag which just takes in a string, but it's actually a comma separated list, or it's actually like a map that's using angle brackets instead of colons to separate keys and values, right? There are all these kinds of things that in YAML you would just want to use like a normal list or a map to represent. And so a big part of it was sort of writing a lot of the parsers for the flag stuff were not actually like just in the flag parsing part of the code base. They were like buried way down where like the string value actually gets consumed. So part of it was like lifting all of those out into like, here's this flag type and here's that flag type that parses this thing. And then parsing it directly into like a map in the config object instead of sort of that really late parsing. And that part of that was lifting validation out, right? Because validation always happens after parsing. So a lot of the validation was really buried deep in the code too. And so part of it was lifting that out into like the normal config validation function. Then there was all the global flag stuff as well. So that was when we discovered that we had all these third-party libraries that were just registering global flag values on that sort of global command line. And then we were like, oh, this is bad because random libraries can add stuff to our command line API that we may or may not support. So that was when we added all that like global flags.go stuff so that those had to be explicitly registered and we were no longer going to parse just the global command line flag set. So that was another thing. That I think you might want to double check what's in controller manager and make sure it is like explicitly doing that, but I think things should be explicitly doing that at this point. So that's probably not as big of a amount of work. What else? And then a lot of it was just like trying to migrate as many things as possible before moving. So there were things that were already deprecated, then we left those out. There were the instance specific things, like host name override and node IP that we weren't. There was some discussion around like, oh, maybe we could like be smart and auto detect these and get rid of them altogether, and that kind of stalled things. I think probably the real solution to that is just to like have two config files. And there was somebody who signed up to write a KEP for that. I'm not sure. I have to check in with them and see what their progress is.
So you said there would be two config files.
Yes.
For the global and
yeah.
the global and okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So you'd have one for the things that are shareable and one for the things that are not.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yep.
There was one comment I think in the KEP that somebody mentioned it would make actually difficult for starting multiple binaries which Kube Control Manager kind of manages, like Cloud Controller Manager, but that's obsolete now. But somebody mentioned that like the config files, when we are basically trying to merge everything into a single config file, maybe two now, it would make things difficult to kind of have different configuration for different binaries. I don't know how I don't know. So that's like a point which I think should address.
Yes.
How did you reply to his comment?
Yeah, that's and Alex, and we've talked about that a bit too. Like, there's this overarching issue of when you have a controller manager style binary host, right? This binary is a host for a bunch of other controllers. It abstracts away some things for them. And then it adds some efficiency because they can share memory for things like informers. What is the right abstraction for modularizing the configuration of all the subcontrollers in that binary host so that they can be split out into other hosts, or so that they can be, basically so they can be split out if you wanted to split them out. So the way that looks in my head is we decide on what sort of core functionality a controller manager should have, and that becomes the controller manager config. And then all of the other subcontrollers are their own config objects. I think this could be like a long, like Shetty discussion in open source. And I'm okay with just picking whatever people are kind of comfortable with right now to move forward and get to a versioned API. And then we can say, hey, we got to a versioned API, great. Now we can refactor it because people like recognize that this is painful in these ways.
Okay.
But yeah, we can't, a lot of times we end up stalled on like trying to make everything perfect.
Yeah.
So what would be like the best way forward? Would we like identify on how all the like flags are being passed right now? If we can
I want to start with like a high level description of what needs to be done in order for us to be confident enough to move controller managers config to beta. So it would be like, it's possible to serialize the config if that's still a problem. You know, hidden structures have been extracted into like more typical YAML structures. We've addressed any backwards compatibility concerns with migrating from command line flags to configuration. And that could mean we just say, hey, you're only allowed to use one or the other. And it could mean we implement like more complex flag to config mapping logic that, you know, enables command lines to be interleaved with configuration. And I think there's like maybe another question of like, are these, you know, the APIs that we really like? It's like one thing we did in the kubelet, because migrating to config is technically crossing a version boundary. You can change defaults of things that had bad defaults and stuff. Like, that is an option, but it will slow down your work if you really go down that rabbit hole of like trying to discuss what the best shape for every existing option is. And I think it will be faster to get to component config if we don't try to redesign the whole API. I think those are kind of the main things. And so what I would do is I would write a short document, maybe a 1 page or maybe 2 pages on like, here are the things that need to be true for us to move to beta, and then make that a, like, just like there's like move kubeproxy to v1 beta 1 cap, like write a move controller manager to v1 beta 1 cap. Here are all the things that we need to do. And that can be our template for like managing this work.
All right. So like, what would be some good, like a lot of these things you mentioned, I still need to look like into. I don't really know how does work and work together. So is there like any like previous PRs or documents, like you mentioned the kubelet, you know, which describe these kind of things, or some more
probably the best,
or you mentioned like hidden structs or anything?
Probably the best document that covers all of that is that version component configuration files doc. which has the section where it describes kind of everything we did to the kubelet. But I want you to read that with I can send you a link to that as well here. I want you to read that with sort of a critical eye, because some of the things it was the first attempt to solve these problems. It doesn't mean it was the best attempt to solve these problems. So I'm going to send that in just the chat here. There's the chat.
I think you should use Slack or something. Chats doesn't have the memory. I mean,
Yeah. Sure.
Just to confirm, so so Obitech is you, right, Alexander?
Yeah, it's me, exactly.
Yeah, the names are different, so I'm like.
Yeah, it's my old gamer name. It just stuck around.
So I'm going to share, which I got working. So this is the doc, and it basically goes through all those problems, like the global flags thing. We already have API groups created for most of these now, so that's not as big a problem. Some of these may or may not match up with the patterns that you see in Controller Manager. So Kubelet basically just parse flags directly into the internal version of the object. Controller Manager, API Server, I think kubeproxy have different architecture to their options construction code. And I think they have a pattern that Stefan calls like options in config. And so there's options structs, which are what flags get parsed into. And then there are config structs, which contain both the options and additional like runtime structures. So like if you're constructing a controller or like some other object that is not a serializable object, like maybe it's some interface or something, config has those too. And then like the run method is attached to the config object. So it's a little bit different, and we might have to do some problem solving around the best way to kind of map between that and the component config. And I think that might be the reason that kubeproxy really wanted to just say use one or the other.
Mm-hmm.
With Kubelet, it was pretty easy to have like a direct mapping from flags to the config because they were just these simple structs. So you might have to change that. Yeah. And then there's some notes in here on like all the backwards compatibility stuff we did, which legacy flag was maybe an approach to fix, but it would be ideal if we could avoid having to do that again because it was rather complicated. So take a look through here.
Nice, yeah. That's a good reference,
yeah.
Thanks. I'll look through.
Yeah, that should give you some good background. And remember, we have time too, because we'll be off for 3 weeks. You guys have time to kind of get your heads around this and get a plan together. But that's the main thing I want you to do is get like an overarching plan together, because it's a collection of problems that need to be solved. It's not just one problem.
Yeah.
I was under the impression that the serialization is the biggest problem. I mean, to the first problem we need to tackle, but it seems it is resolved now.
I don't know. That needs to be, somebody needs to.
Okay.
If you want to look at that, that's great. Yeah.
Okay.
Cool.
So Alex, are you familiar with the code base of Kube Control Manager?
Not much now, are you?
No. I'm new to this.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've dug through it. So, I mean, if you guys want, we can just hop into it right now and poke around, see what we can find while I'm online.
Yeah. Sure, let's do it.
And it's recorded, so we can basically refer it later also.
Yeah, we're definitely recording.
You also mentioned like Kube Controller, just so for understanding, Kube Controller Manager is like a binary host, right?
Yes.
which like stars other binaries. Is that right?
Yes. So Cube Controller Manager, well, it doesn't host other binaries, it hosts other controllers. So the reason to do that is, let me add this. The reason to do that is that the main reason is that all those controllers rely on informers to get updates from the API server, and you can collapse it down to a single informer cache that's shared among all the controllers if you host them in the same binary, and that saves a lot of memory. Let's see. I'm trying to find the file where like all of the subcontrollers are registered. I think I actually had notes on this that I sent out. Maybe just been Qlet and Qproxy pointers. Yeah, it was just Qlet and Qproxy.
Yeah, I was muted. I was I was speaking the same thing. I said it has information on kubelet and Qproxy, not on Kube Controller Manager.
Gotcha.
But I think the pattern would be similar.
Yeah, I think it's similar to Qproxy. Yeah, so at least there's options for each controller in this package options. So you can see here. And this is where flags are registered against these options structs. There's some validation, but not all validation happens there. Let's see. And then this is a function that applies the options to the configuration. And so I'm assuming that this is the kind of config. Yeah. Yes. So this looks like maybe different controllers already are in separate API groups. Let's see. Group name anywhere in here. So that's worth looking at. Like, this doesn't necessarily look like it's complete. Like, I don't see the API group name. So if you go in Qlet, there's a group name associated with it.
Mm-hmm.
But here, I don't see any group names. Local scheme builder add scheme. So maybe that is Yeah. So it doesn't seem like there's any group name being set on this. So that might be part of why they said it's not serializable. There may be problems like that that are sort of scattered around. Yeah, so the high level, I guess, it looks like there's these sort of options files where options are read into some struct. In this case, this struct is just like embedding the component config struct. Looks like the internal type, and reading the flags into that. So yeah, I think it's definitely worth kind of sketching out what's actually happening here, which is different from the kubelet. And hopefully Stefan can maybe be a resource too, since he's a lot more familiar with this code. And then I wanted to find where all of the controllers are run. Now there's a lot of start X controller function in here, but it's just not. Oh yeah, there's this other controller manager folder, which I think is code that's shared between Cloud Controller Manager and Kube Controller Manager. But that is not very useful. Yeah, that's kind of generic shared stuff. It's not, I'm looking for where all the subcontrollers are registered.
Is it in
Maybe Bootstrap. There's basically an array somewhere that has all of these start functions listed in it. And then there's kind of host logic. New controller manager command. I believe it's generated by these known controllers. The controller is disabled by default function. Okay. Here we go. So there's this map of all of these. these controller initializers in controller manager.go. And those are kind of all the different start functions. And they all follow the same signature, which is this. So basically you take a context in and then it returns a handler and some information. This context is all of this information is what's sort of common between different subcontrollers. A lot of it is kind of runtime information. So like your informer, but then there's also this component config field. So that I'm guessing is just all of them together. And so maybe there's a better way to subdivide what each controller can see. Yeah, so controller API's config has the component config that encompasses everything, and that is embedding the internal, this is an internal type, embedding the internal types of all of these other ones. And I think that when we talk about breaking it up into separate substructures, what it means is instead of having this one giant superstructure through controller manager configuration that is hosting the config for every single one, we actually break all of these into separate API groups. And I think some of the contention was like, oh my God, that's a lot of API groups. But on the other hand, you actually get that modularity.
Yeah, I think that was the one of the comments John mentioned, right? Or I'm not sure if it was him or Stefan. If that is like practicable, right?
Yeah. So I think for the, you know, and it's kind of up to you guys, because it's like, how much work do you want to do up front? Because we could split it up and we could implement multi-doc support so that it's still possible to write them all in a single file and slurp them all in from one place. We could figure out how to map them to the controllers that they're meant for. Like one option is to key on the kind, and wire all that up. Or we could just decide to stick with one massive configuration file, as annoying as that is, and move forward to, at least a V1 Alpha 2 with that, and kind of get everything else in place to where we can say now our choice is move to beta with what we have, or break this up before we move to beta. But there's so many other problems to kind of solve outside of the like, how do we split these up, that I think it might be worth solving those first if you want it to be a little more expedient.
I think for me, it's like I want to like start doing something, so that because once I get used to the code, then I can be more confident with respect to what I can do. And now that I'm not that experienced and I'm not confident around that how much I can take it and how much I can do it.
Yeah, so a good place to start then might be just getting to where we're sure it's serializable, and we're sure that you can read the config in from a file. And maybe just start with that first, and then we can say, okay, there's these other problems with the APIs that need to be fixed before we can move to beta, but at least we've figured out the file part first.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, technically we don't have to split it up, right? We can use those types there, and it would just be a massive config file, right?
Right.
And then
Yeah,
but that would be alpha 2 then basically, right? We will go to alpha 2 then say, okay, here we are, and we have here, there is the option, these are the options to go to beta.
Yeah, you could do that. I mean, there's no guarantee of stability, and probably if it's not serializable right now, nobody's using it.
yeah.
So I wouldn't, maybe we don't have to go to an alpha 2. Maybe we just do it in alpha 1 that currently exists, and we just kind of fix it.
Yeah, I think making it serializable would be a good first step, just to like get to know how this stuff works and what steps are necessary, and just like dig through all the different individual configs of all those controllers and just see what's going on there. So I think this could give some confidence, and once we know what's going on, maybe we have a better image of, is it really is it maybe better to just split this up or split just a couple things up into a general config or so.
Right. Where I want to get to is where we, especially you guys, understand the problem well, and like the specifics of how it actually works, and then you can make an argument either way. What's important is that you're able on your own to make that argument.
Yeah, I agree.
Cool.
All right. I'll definitely read the doc you posted on the kubelet, and with that in mind, look at the controller manager, and then probably while I read this, I'll take some notes, and some questions will come up, and we'll probably meet again here with some more info and some more questions.
Yeah, sounds good. I'll be on vacation the next 3 weeks, but I'll still be periodically dropping into Slack to see what's going on.
Yeah,
okay.
No worries.
I am
Lala,
working.
is that?
Yeah. Sir, please go ahead. Please.
So can I? Your name is? Can I call you Lala? Is that?
Yeah, that's fine.
Your name?
Yeah,
All right.
yeah.
Nice. So I mean, yeah, what we can do is we just read this stuff, and maybe we stay in touch, and I'll take some notes. Maybe you can take some notes, and we compare them and see if we if we can come up with some ideas on how to move this forward, and maybe we can create a shared document on what our ideas are, and exchange a little bit.
Yeah. So you have a document, right? You have a Word document which says about. I'm just trying to find the document.
I've been taking a couple of notes during this talk. It's, if you look in the meeting notes, it's linked under today's date, basically.
Okay.
I can.
Yeah, and then make sure you guys include at TBH also.
Yeah.
In those discussions.
Yeah.
Can help as well. Yeah. He's a nice guy. I met him at QCon, actually. We had a good conversation.
He's also working on the flag migration.
He's working on the component config migrations. Yeah. Yeah. I think his GitHub handle is different from his Slack. His Slack is TBH, but they should both be in that sign up sheet from way back when.
Yeah, he's on Slack. We can ping him. So I think that the challenge with this one is because it's a lot of history in this effort. So there's a lot of unwanted information, I think. So I think we can just cut the crap and just say, okay, these are the things we're going to do. These are 3 or 4 things, not much more than 3 or 4 things. Let's finish this. Let's do it first, one thing at a time. And because when I was trying to read all these three documents, there's so much of documentation, like sometimes it's overwhelming, like,
Yeah,
okay, what
it's
happened
just too
there? What
much.
happened there?
And
Yeah.
you can make a good decision without necessarily knowing all of it. And other people will chime in with their opinions. So like
Yeah.
don't feel like you're gonna miss something, because people will show up to tell you what they think is important. And it's much better that somebody be paying attention to this and have an opinion and be driving progress than like everyone waiting for some sort of consensus. Like
Yeah.
there's really no, like you'll see a lot of things in Kubernetes that are sort of claimed to be driven by consensus, but under the covers it's always like one or a few people like actually, trying to build that consensus. So yeah, everyone eventually agrees to something, but somebody is going around and having the discussions with them and saying, hey, like, would you be able to compromise on this or that in order to put like the overall package together? So, it's much more important that somebody be owning this work who has the time to kind of, build that consensus or make a decision.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds good. I think the first part is like understanding the problem well enough.
Yes.
Which I think we'll need to do some reading and, just looking at things, asking some more questions. And then on the way, like trying to come up with some points we identify, which can be good for like tackling first.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay.
And then the only other thing is, try and stay in touch with people who are, either signed up to solve some of the other sub problems. Like if you just take a look at that mentorship sheet, if you see that you're so like instance specific config might be an example. If you see you're solving a problem somebody's signed up for on there, like ping them and try to make sure you're in line with whatever they were thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And I know Ross has his move cube proxy to beta kept as well, so that might be worth taking a quick look at.
Nice.
Okay. So yeah, I think that's it. One suggestion for Alex is, so the Word document, I just modified one line, but then next time I will do only suggest, so that the idea is, when I do suggest some modification, you will get to know what I'm trying to say, and you can accept it. And you can actually suggest that I basically come to know what kind of changes you're doing to the document. So it's kind of mental map of what's changing in the document. Basically, I think it will help both of us.
Oh yeah, sure.
Awesome.
Yeah, we can use this document to
Yeah.
move forward and just organize this.
Yeah, it's just a place mentally we can put notes and can basically kind of streamline the thought process. That's it.
Yeah, that's important. Sure.
Yeah.
Alex, is the link to that doc in the notes from today?
Yeah, it is. It's I put it in like the brackets doc.
He also put it in the Slack. I'm not sure if you've seen it.
Yeah, I see it. Yeah. What's going on? There we go. Yeah, okay, cool. All right, you guys have anything else you want to chat about?
So far so good. I think we're set. Just so I mean, Maybe regarding KubeCon, you mentioned that the maintainer track it's like different, right? It's on in like January where this
Yeah,
gets
so I
decided.
emailed Nancy asking what we should do for a maintainer track talk because it said the rules were separate, and she said don't use the CFP, wait until January, and she's going to send an email out. So we'll wait until January for that. And then yeah, Alex, I think
Okay.
you wanted to maybe co-present, right? So
I would love to. Yeah, I
yeah.
would really like to. I just like why I'm asking again is because like my company is now like organizing like travel plans and tickets, so I'm kind of like holding off on that. I'm saying like, you know, I might be on a speaker ticket, and I have some friends in Amsterdam which I can stay, so there's no problem. Just
They
so
will
you know.
they will give you a refund if you get made into a speaker after you've purchased a ticket. So don't shy away from just
Okay, that's good to know.
getting in. Yeah. Yeah,
Okay,
that's happened to me.
that's
Like virtually every year I've gone to KubeCon and given some kind of talk. Like I've always just bought a ticket and then later been like, oh yeah, I kind of want to do a talk, and then I end up on somebody's talk and get my ticket refunded.
okay. That's good to know. Yeah, good. So, all right. So I just go ahead and just buy a ticket and then.
Yeah, they'll take
Nice.
care of it.
Nice. Cool. Yeah, then yeah. Well, as soon as that comes up, we can talk again about, you know, how we structure it. Maybe you guys can come down as well. Would be nice, you know, to meet up.
Yeah, cool. All right. Well, thanks, folks. Happy holidays. You know, enjoy your time off if you're taking time off.
You too.
You know, I'll see you in Slack and I'll see you in January.
Yeah. Happy
All right.
holidays, guys. Bye.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks
You
a
guys
lot.
too. Bye bye.